The Secrets of Middle-earth is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth, where we discuss the hidden themes and deeper layers found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whether in his writings or in any of the media derived from them. I'm Thomas Salerno, and joining me tonight on the panel are Pat Mason. Hello there, Pat.
Howdy, Thomas.
Hey, and Jeff Haecker. Hey there, Jeff.
Hey, Thomas.
And be sure to follow The Secrets of Middle-earth on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or any podcast app of your choice. And you can find us on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, on X, where we are at SQPN, and on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. And of course, don't forget to visit sqpn.com/merch, where you can get your own official Secrets of Middle-earth gear, such as our awesome t-shirt, which is a great way to support our show and to show your love for Tolkien and his wonderful world of Middle-earth. So, for the next 6 months, we will be going meticulously through Chapter 14 of the Silmarillion to discuss all of the lands of Beleriand in immense detail. I joke, of course, but we will, in fact, be discussing that chapter as well as chapters 15 and 16, which include much more interesting material on our return at long last to the Silmarillion.
So if you're standing on the west bank of Sirion and looking east, what you'll see is a heather, but that's actually a marsh. Don't be tricked. But if you're standing on the east bank of Sirion looking west...
I know our friend Caitlin Fascista on her Tea with Tolkien channel on YouTube. She's already done this chapter, and in that video she mentioned something that is so true, that Christopher Tolkien could have added this chapter as an appendix to the Silmarillion, not as like one of the main chapters, because as it is, everything sort of comes to a screeching halt, right? So we can have a geography lesson. Yeah. You know, I mean, like, it's like, okay, yeah, I won the geography bee in 6th grade, but I don't think I'm that, like, you know, interested in it that I want the narrative flow of this Tolkien book interrupted by it. But yeah,
it very much feels like you're having the story told to you by Grandpa Simpson, and it stops in the middle of it. Oh, I got to tell you about, you know, at that time we used to wear onions on our belts. It was the style at the time. You know, 43-minute exposition about what the style was like in 1927. You know.
Yeah. If you do want to read this chapter, there is a good map online that you can use. I believe it's Loader Project, so LOTR Project, and it lets you pull up the maps and you can select and deselect Beleriand. So, I think that would be, if you want to like really get the most out of this chapter, that would be go to the map and you know, you can follow along for the geography.
I guess the one thing that is important for you to know is that in the east, where Beleriand ends, is where the geography of the Lord of the Rings begins, right? Because the Blue Mountains that are on the far east of the map in Beleriand are the same Blue Mountains that are in the far west of the map in the Lord of the Rings. So everything that takes place in the Silmarillion is happening on a separate subcontinent from the main action of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Beleriand is not there anymore by the time this book will be over.
As we shall see, yeah.
As you saw in Rings of Power, if you watched it, there was no Beleriand. Or it was under the sea.
But yeah, so that's it for chapter 14, unless you guys had any more thoughts on the layout of Beleriand or its various, like...
The falls of Sirion is probably the coolest thing.
Right.
You don't really get that in the narratives anywhere else. It's not like you have any of the main characters in the rest of the Silmarillion go to the Falls of Sirion or make use of it, really. it's just this cool little geographical fact that only comes out through that one chapter.
And that's where the waterfall goes underground, right? And then it emerges from those 3 caves, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's a great drawing of that in the Atlas of Middle-earth, by the way. It's like instead of reading this chapter, just read the Atlas of Middle-earth. It'll give you if you really want your geography fix for Middle-earth. But yeah, so I guess with that said, we can move on to chapter 15, which is in Beleriand, but not a geography lesson. It is the Noldor in Beleriand. And so I believe last where we left off, they did mention briefly about Turgon and about Turgon's dream, right? And we're just sort of picking up where they left off.
So in the previous chapters, we had the dreams of Turgon and Finrod.
Yeah.
And and they were with each other when they got the dreams from Olmo, but they didn't talk to each other about it. And then they went off their separate ways to go search for the hidden place that had been, and they both had found those places. And then I think where we meet up back in this one, they're sort of, okay, well, now we need to act on whatever this is.
Right, yeah. So Turgon founds and builds the city of Gondolin, or the Hidden Rock, which takes them 52 years to build. And I'm like, that's it? I feel yeah.
Especially elves. You feel like elves, they have centuries and millennia they could spend building. But I guess they have their elven magic and elven craft. They can do things faster and talk to the rocks, probably.
And they don't have to sleep. That's why they're going to steal the Numenorians' jobs, because they're just so good at building stuff, as we know from the Rings of Power. But.
Yeah. When it says like 2 in 50 years, the first time I heard it was like 200. My brain math said 250 years. Just okay, that sounds about right. And then I was like, no, that's not how that works, Pat. It's 52 years. I'm like, that's not long enough.
Especially since it's supposed to be like the grandest city outside of Valinor.
Right. It's supposed to be modeled on the
Tyrion.
city. Yeah.
Tyrion upon Tuna.
Upon Tuna. That's right. And I like how like Finrod goes off and kind of crafts Nagathron, and he's sort of left to his own devices, but Olmo sort of takes Turgon in hand and says, no, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
That's
right. Finrod's much better than Turgon, so Finrod, and I love Finrod's one of my favorite characters from this book. So I'm glad we're finally getting into this. I mean, I know we met him before, but I'm glad we're getting into like his narrative stuff. But yeah, he's Finrod Felagund, and Felagund, I think it was talked about in the one of the last chapters we did. It's Hewer of Caves, because he finds this underground, or he's guided to this underground area and has to build out these caves, and he's friendly with the dwarves and has a lot in common because dwarves love their caves. So
yeah, and like you said, Pat, Olmo really takes Turgon by the hand here and instructs him, like, because the Valar can see somewhat of the future, not all the future, but they have kind of an idea of what's going to happen. And Olmo, like, he's leaving he makes sure that Turgon crosses all his T's and dots all his I's. Like, he sets him up for success, right? He's like, oh, and by the way, you've got to leave. When you leave the place you're currently at, you've got to leave this stuff behind for a messenger who's going to come and visit you. He even tells him the size of the armor, like, what the clothes size needs going to be. Yeah.
How big the helmet needs to be, and it's interesting. I really wish when they had published The Fall of Gondolin, they had included this whole section of this chapter of the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
Because it just coming at it like cold, not having read the Silmarillion in so long, I'm trying to remember. I'm like, all right, why is it important that Tuor goes to Nevros again? Like, why is this armor there? Okay, I'm remembering sort of.
That's right. Yeah.
Olmo just saying, I love it when a plan comes together.
Except when it doesn't, because it's like he still has to rely on the fact that Turgon is going to remember what he's told him. And even if he remembers it, act on it. But that sort of Feanorian pride, creeps into all the Noldor, even the best of them, and as we'll see later, Turgon is like, nah, maybe Olmo was wrong. I think I'm fine here, because the whole thing about Gondolin is that it's a hidden city. It's built in a kind of bowl-shaped valley amidst this ring of mountains. So the idea is that, it's hidden, nobody can find it, because Morgoth doesn't have flying creatures at this time. He hasn't created the flying dragons. The only people who really know the city is there are the great eagles. And so he figures, I'm safe here. Nobody can get to me. But, Olmo instructs him, don't put too much faith in what you've built here, because he says true hope only comes from the sea. So in other words, you're not going to be able to defeat Morgoth in the end. You're going to need the help of the Valar. Yeah, you can build this city here, but don't get too invested in it. It's almost like, that I don't think it's biblical, but one of the saints coined that phrase, we have no earthly city, right? Or was it St. Paul? I can't actually remember now. I'll have to look it up, because now that's going to bug me.
Yeah, I feel like that's Paul. And I mean, it comes from Jesus, right? Him saying the Son of Man has no home, has no bed, right?
Right.
When he's talking about what it actually really takes.
Okay, it's from Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For we have here no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. Right. Okay.
Yeah. I feel like this is very much Olmo's gambit, basically, to try and save what he can, because he knows the Noldor are doomed, right? Like, yeah. Literally.
They're literally doomed. Thanks, Mandos.
Yeah, they're under the doom of Mandos. Doom. Yeah. See Olmo like shaking his fist at Mandos. But he knows the men are not, right? And neither are the Sindar, technically. And so this feels very much like, okay, I'm gonna set this up. I'm gonna squirrel away these elves, and I'm gonna save them using a man, and we're gonna try and slip out of this doom here. And of course, you're right. The whole Feanorian streak, the doom comes into play.
Yeah, and he further says that treason will awake within the walls of Gondolin, which is actually going to be set up in the next chapter we'll talk about Maeglin. But but at that point you wonder, Olmo, couldn't you have been more specific and say, it's going to be this guy called Maeglin, have nothing to do with that guy.
It's going to be a dark elf.
Yeah.
But I guess, like I said, the Valar only know part of the future. They seem to know the broad strokes, but they don't seem to know the gritty details. Because of free will.
Yeah. Well, they also had that vision when they created Arda. Mm-hmm. They had that vision of what it would become. So they, maybe that's part of it too, is they saw that vision, and then I think Eru Ilúvatar took a lot of that away so that they could use free will within that creation to see what it would, so that they could, part of the creation is the ongoing building up of it. So similar to our faith, is we're constantly building up, or we're supposed to constantly be building up the kingdom of God, and not, and we're not there yet. We won't be there until the end times, but we're constantly striving toward that.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because I've just been reading through the Book of Lost Tales, and there's an earlier version of the Ainulindale where they get the Valar get a more, that they don't get the vision. They're actually brought to Arda in the progress of being made. And so they get to see the early parts of it. He changed it later so that they only see the vision, and then Eru Iluvatar says, let these things be, and then time starts. But it was interesting to see the process of the creative process as he slowly refined the like metaphysics behind this universe. And speaking of prophecies, I think the last important bit that Olmo says is that he tells Turgon that the messenger who I'm sending, hope will be born of this messenger. And of course, we know, spoiler, Tuor will marry Turgon's daughter Idril, and from them will come Earendil, who will finally bring the hope from the west, the Valar, to the aid of Middle Earth. I get why he wasn't specific in that. He didn't want to mess up the future, but
yeah, it's being very literal.
He didn't want to have a Back to the Future scenario.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Or even worse, a Futurama scenario.
Oh, right. Yeah. Wait, are you talking about that episode where Fry becomes his own grandfather?
Yes. Oh yeah. Let's take Templar advice from Mr. I'm my own grandpa.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's your kids' tour. It's your kids.
We gotta go back to the future.
Oh, now I can't. Now someone needs to make fan art of Olmo in a DeLorean. Forget that like underwater chariot he has. He needs a DeLorean.
It's a DeLorean.
Well,
Get in, Turgon.
There's already been a time traveling train, so maybe just do a submarine instead this time.
But meanwhile, while all this is going on, Galadriel is in Doriath, and she's staying with Melian, and Melian's trying to get information out of Galadriel. I thought this was an interesting section where she's giving Galadriel the third degree, kind of.
Yeah, this would be great to see on screen. I mean, I know for patrons, you can pitch this as a show, but this would be great to see this play out on screen as a series of conversations between the two of them, because Melian is just slowly trying to needle into Galadriel, and Galadriel's probably figuring it out, and she's like, "Oh wait, I gotta stop saying stuff." She's gonna figure it out.
Remember me? Stop talking. It's like, it's like, yeah.
Galadriel and Maiar never seems to mix well.
Yeah, but now the importance of this though is because Thingol, Melian's husband, is related to the elves who were slain by the Noldor in the first Kinslaying, right? They're all Teleri elves ultimately. So if this comes out, it's going to sour Thingol's relationship with the Noldor, who he's already kind of suspicious of. He's not on the best terms with them, but this could like seriously fracture. The elves won't have much of a united front anymore if the truth comes out. So you can see Galadriel's motivation to hide the truth, but at the same time, don't hide the truth from people. It's like, oh yeah, we were, responsible for killing your relatives. That's important information,
Well, this is just further setting up the Galadriel we'll get in Rings of Power. She's impulsive and maybe not, not telling the truth. Like if she had told in Rings of Power, if she had told Brimbor, by the way,
kill Brimbor.
Yeah.
By the way,
oh, we sent some messengers one time, but and they didn't check back up on them. Well, I guess that's good enough. Yeah, okay.
That's good. Yeah. Or it's setting up her not revealing important information to people and pursuing a kind of ends justify the means strategy, because she's like, well, if this comes out, it will kind of wreck the good thing we've got going here, this alliance against Morgoth. So for the greater good, I'm willing to keep this a secret. But, but she does give out some information. She reveals that the Noldor are in quest of the Silmarils. So she reveals about the Silmarils and talks about Finwë's death, but not necessarily. But she keeps the kinslaying a secret, and that's the key thing. But it says that Melian perceives that she's holding something back, and of course she does, because Melian's a Maiar. So
yeah, and we get to see more of, and like elves were kind of learning, and maybe we knew this already, but elves will kind of learn in the next chapter. They kind of have a little bit of telepathy of a sort, or at least like they can kind of perceive each other's minds. If both parties are open to it, because we'll see in the next chapter, Myglin wants to, like, he's kind of has feelings for someone who doesn't have feelings for him, and she kind of closes her mind to him. So we're starting to kind of see that and we do, and it's cool how we kind of see that in Lord of the Rings, where we see in the movies where Galadriel and Elrond are kind of having that long range, like, communication a little bit. So, and again, Rings of Power is setting that up because they're good friends in Rings of Power. So,
well, but like, that's the thing that cheeses me off about Rings of Power is the elves. That's sort of like otherworldly. We exist not just in the base material plane, but also we have cognizance of our spirit and the spirit world around us and each other's spirits, and sort of the existing in both places at the same time that the elves seem to have. And this is, I think, one of the fruits of that. And the fact that they don't seem to have that in Rings of Power, like, it irks me a little bit. I'm like, these are just like, humans with pointy ears. Come on.
Right. Humans with pointy ears and with superpowers. And it's like, and it's not to go on a tangent here, but it's kind of like what we said about the hobbits in the Rings of Power, where they're kind of, instead of like genuine hobbits, they're the D&D idea stereotype of halflings. It's like that with the elves too. In the Rings of Power, they're very much the D&D, tabletop gaming idea of, and what an elf is, a long-lived human with superpowers and pointy ears, right? Without like, but yeah, you definitely get to see more of, especially in the Silmarillion, where the elves are even more clued in to the spirit world and more powerful than they will be in the Lord of the Rings in the Third Age. This is the elves at their height, basically at the height of their powers, which we'll definitely see in chapters to come, maybe next time, with a certain duel that takes place, which I won't spoil much of.
Yeah, and seeing where they're at, how powerful they are now after, like, if they hadn't had the kinslaying, like, if that hadn't have happened, like, because I mean, Fëanor was the best in the sense of he could have done the most good, but he was Fëanor and wasn't going to. But they have, they lost so many along the way. Of they could have even been at a higher strength, but because they've already, the kinslaying started something that has led to the breaking of the kin with the elves. So
and word gets out. Apparently, somebody snitches. Círdan's involved somehow. It says, well, like, he
and it goes into, I think this is one of Morgoth's plots, right? He's going to sow division between the elves by, he finds out, right, somehow. Probably, kidnapping people and torturing them. And he then, with that knowledge, sends agents out and starts spreading the word. And this is like a number one tactic we see from Morgoth. He uses it in Valinor. He'll be a disembodied spirit and whisper things to people or put ideas into people's heads. We see Sauron use it in Numenor. We see Sauron use it in later ages, earlier ages. Like, it's just like, this is like an number one evil thing. It's spread rumors, and if they're true, so much the better.
It's literally diabolical, right? Because the word diabolos means to divide, to scatter. So it's literally dividing and breaking people up. Yeah. And of course, Thingol finds out. He's furious. not only, he's like, okay, so not only are my kin slain in the kinslaying, but these people who I held as guests in my own house kept it from me. And I liked the speech by, who is it, Angrod, who is Galadriel and Finrod's brother. And he makes this speech where he defends the House of Finarfin, basically saying, look, we didn't do it. we were there, but we didn't do it. He reveals the kinslaying, the doom of Mandos, and he talks about the burning of the ships by Feanor, and basically how, like, look, we had to go through the grinding ice and all that stuff. We've made up for any, fault on our side and not stopping the kinslaying. It was an effective speech, I thought. Definitely a high point of the chapter.
Yeah, he's defending everybody, and I mean it's like one of those things. If you're caught in a lie, you're like, well, we weren't there.
Yeah,
I couldn't get there in time to stop it, or it could be taken as an excuse, but
yeah,
like ultimately Thingol does kind of recognize what they went through, and that yes, they were not part of the kinslaying. They would not have been, like, if they were next to Feanor, I don't think they would have started kinslaying. They might have turned on Feanor and had a different kinslaying, but
right, yeah.
But I mean, I think that's the idea, is they wouldn't have been a part of that. It was Feanor and Feanor's sons that were being so crazy with that.
Yeah, I love how one of the things that causes him to make the speech is him remembering, because he's been in Thingol's presence before. He was allowed to go there and bring back messages, and when he brought him back to the rest of the Noldorian princes, is it Curafin? I want to say.
Oh yeah.
Basically says, why are we listening to this secondhand elf? Basically. And he's not even he's not even one of our brothers. He's,
right. And like, and your mom was a Teleri anyway. You're not even full-blooded Noldor. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, he throws a bunch of shade on him, and he's like, all right, you know what? I'm going to rat you out to Thingol. You kinslaying son of a Feanor.
There are consequences, though. I mean, Thingol essentially outlaws the Noldoran tongue from his domain, from his lands. And it says even many of the Noldor, just out of convenience, end up adopting Sindarin as an everyday speech. So that's how that becomes the main sort of elf tongue that gets spoken, even up until the time of the Lord of the Rings. So we get some backstory for the languages here too.
Yeah, and thinking of it being Tolkien, who's a linguist, like banning a language to him would be like one of the high crimes, probably. So it's like, if you take that meta context of it, it's a pretty high, it's a pretty high punishment to ban this language, because if anytime any kind of conquering army has banned the language or banned something of, like, that's not a good thing. But
right,
yeah.
But because Thingol's, he's not the conqueror. He's welcomed them as guests, and I think it's just and language being a root of things. I think maybe the idea is, like, if they're not speaking this tongue, maybe it'll kind of help them move on from that past while they're within his lands.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from Thingol's point of view before. Yeah,
because speech control is very closely allied with attempted thought control, because you go to other languages. Every language has idioms and has turns of phrase and has words that just don't translate well into another. Like, it would take a paragraph in English to describe this one Spanish word, or it would take a paragraph in Spanish. And all languages are like that. And so there are going to be things the Sindar probably don't even have words for, because they were never in Valinor. And they're like, you can't use those words anymore. You're here. You're in Middle Earth. You need to be here. And the other thing to consider is language use has a huge impact on poetry. I often and I occasionally write poetry on the side. It's bad. I'll never read it. Don't ask me.
Same.
But,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it's in English, it is locked into a set of rhythmic patterns and a set of rhyming schemes, because only certain English words rhyme with certain other English words.
Right.
Unlike some of the Latin-based languages where you have 4,000 words that end with A. I can rhyme with anything. I can make, and so the lyrical patterns you can make song and poetry with one language are not necessarily anywhere near the same in another language. And so in a lot of ways it's a big deal. Like Jeff was saying, it's a much bigger deal than you might at first think.
Yeah, and English is such a weird. If you ever saw like learning about the history of English, it's such a weird mishmash language, and
Yes.
And I know every language has its own backstory and history and stuff. But and I actually like talking to people from other cultural backgrounds and other countries about idioms, and what idioms make sense in another language it wouldn't make sense in English, or vice versa. Like I remember using with a Polish acquaintance once. We were going to drive somewhere and I'm like, "Do you want to ride shotgun?" And of course that's an English idiom, which my friend, being from Poland, did not understand what I was talking about.
What do you mean exactly?
That's basically what he said. Yeah.
Is there danger? Do I have to hold the gun in my lap? What's the...
Well, if you're a stagecoach, if you're on a stagecoach in the Old West, then yes, you do.
Then yes,
Yes,
but that's
was what you
literally
did.
where that comes from. But that's steeped in Americana, in American history and the myth of the Old West myth and stuff like that. So yeah, but and I love it on one of our other SQPN podcasts, Mysterious World. Whenever Jimmy goes into these deep dives about language and idiom and where words come from and how these work, and I'm sure that this was Tolkien's bread and butter. So yeah, you're definitely right that banning Noldor, which is basically, it's a dialect of Quenya, right? Yeah. And that's like a derivative, like the original Elven language. This is a big deal, and how it's going to influence culture down the centuries. I mean, I think he says at the end of the chapter, so Quenya becomes a language of lore. It essentially becomes a dead language in Middle-earth because people aren't speaking it as like a living language, like Sindarin, and
yeah, it's very much like Latin these days, and Latin is used in the context of the faith. I mean, you can still learn Latin, and I mean, it has its like outside of the church, though. There's not much modern use of it, other than if you're a historian, if you want to read more text from the time of of the Roman Empire, then you might want to pick up some Latin. But aside from that, there's not really any modern real usage of it. So yeah, similar to that.
But it makes it interesting because a dead language doesn't change, right? The thing about a living language is the meaning of words changes over time, and the language will adopt new words and get rid of old words. And like you were saying, Thomas, English is super awesome about, I'm just going to adopt every word I see. You're a word now, and you're a word now.
Yeah, and it's it's always taking words from other languages. Yeah.
I'm just going to turn this entire set of adjectives into nouns, and all of them now are verbs because I can adult now. That's a verb. It used to just be a noun like 20 years ago. Anyways.
I feel so bad for people taking English as a second language, because I'm like, you just take any rule book of language and throw it out the window with English. It's like, yeah,
but a dead language doesn't have that problem. It's the same no matter what. Like, and if you're reading histories, you might have to change depending on where in the history you were, but it won't change in the present, which makes it super useful for us when the papal office issues a document in Latin. We know exactly what every single word means and every turn of phrase. And like, we know what he meant by this. There's no interpretation here. We've already figured that one out.
They've had to invent a few new words, like to describe like electronic devices and electronic stuff. But yeah, pretty much, Latin is Latin, like ecclesial Latin is pretty much going to stay the same, It reminds me too of how I believe there's a sci-fi example of this too, but the reference is now escaping me, but whatnot. But I'm sure it'll come to me after we've hit end on the record. Side,
Are you thinking about Ender's Game?
I might be,
because in Ender's Game and in the later books, like humanity is spread across the cosmos, and they have interstellar communications. And that's the only thing, like, keeping the languages the same, because as soon as those get cut off, like a language would kind of, it would kind of become a pigeon, especially if you have multiple cultures, like they'll start to intermingle. Like one example is like in Firefly, where you have like a mix of English and like Chinese or I think maybe it's Mandarin specifically, but they kind of mix those together, and to kind of everybody speaks a little bit of both. So yeah, if you lose like a common like standard, then yeah, it would there would be shifts, and then eventually it would become a little bit unrecognizable the further down you get.
Right. Yeah. It would like how, if you've ever tried to read like Beowulf in Old English, and it's like this is like gibberish. Like, how is this English? And it's like, but it actually is. It's a lot more like German than it is like English. Yeah. So before this chapter ends, we get a brief check-in with Finrod, though. And they mention about I think it's Galadriel, right? Is asking him why he hasn't taken a wife.
Yes.
Since they've gotten back to Middle Earth. Yeah.
She's learned from Melian well. She now needs to pry into other people's business.
Yeah, and what is it? He has it's interesting because they give Finrod a little bit of foresight into his own future. He foresees taking an oath in the future that will require him to not have family ties that are going to hold him back from fulfilling this oath, which I thought was really interesting. It kind of reminded me of how, like at least in Roman Catholicism, in the Latin Rite, how priests are, free from family ties to devote their entire attention to their flock, and their vocation as a priest. They forego marriage and family to be free for other things. So I thought that was interesting.
And if you've ever, one thing a lot of people ask is if you've ever done any kind of discernment is, well, like, why can't priests be married? I mean, this is kind of an aside, but it's, it's because it takes all of you. Like, it's the church is literally your, like, not in a, physical sense, although some ways, but it's like the church is your bride, who you serve. And that is your purpose. Whereas if you're married and have kids, like your kind of focus is split of you have to serve the church, but also serve your family. So yeah, if you've ever kind of done any kind of discernment of that, that's like, I think it's definitely the correct, the correct way of like it. If you have, because and we've had different rites, like the English rite, or not the English rite, the
Byzantine?
The Church of England, whatever. I can't.
Yeah, the Anglican.
Oh, the Anglican use. Yeah.
Now they're coming. Now a lot of Anglicans have come over, and if you're married, they're not going to make you not be married and be a priest. So that's kind of an interesting kind of halfway point. But I couldn't imagine being, married and being a priest. Like, I don't think it. There's just because it takes all of you. But anyway, that's an aside.
Well, you'll even run into folks from other rites within the church who do allow their priests to be married, not their bishops, but their priests.
Right.
And a lot of the priests don't get married, even though they're allowed to, because it's a whole job and it's a whole life. It's
right.
Just,
yeah.
It's a vocation. It's not just your job.
Mm-hmm. And I think Finrod has that sense of mission, that he's like, there's something in the future that's important that I don't know the details of, that I'm being called to do, and it's going to take all of me, and I'm going to need to be free to answer this call when it comes. And I just thought that's a really interesting way of setting up future events in the story.
And it does also mention that he did have somebody that he may have married back in Valinor, who was a Vanyar, who did not come with him.
Right, and they're separated. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she's too busy just hanging out with the Valor all the time. That
The Vanyar do, yeah.
Well, and I think it speaks a lot to kind of, the price that's paid by the Noldor for going the road that they did. Even the ones who didn't, go to the kinslaying, they get stuck with the Helcaraxa and with, leaving behind people they knew and loved, because not even all the Noldor go.
Right.
I think it kind of speaks to that sort of, the knowledge that they're really not home and they really do know it.
Yeah. And like you said, Pat, of what they've sacrificed to be here, and what they've in some cases for revenge or pride, or in and with the houses of Fingolfin and Finarfin, definitely to kind of show the House of Feanor that, we're not just junk that you can leave behind on the way. Yeah. Do you guys have any other thoughts about this chapter before we move on to the tale of Maeglin?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. So yeah, chapter 16. So this is of Maeglin. And I don't know what you guys thought. This one, it just occurred to me, this chapter has a very fairy tale feel about it. Very classic fairy tale. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And it's, looking at who wrote it, who's.
I mean, yeah, definitely. Yeah. But, it has the princess who is lost in the dark forest, and she comes across this stranger who lives there, and she ends up becoming his bride and is held captive, and they have a son together, and she's trying to escape. It's just like it has something of Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm about it, I think. Yeah, that makes it. And the great thing about Tolkien is that he takes a lot of these things and he just integrates them into his wider mythology, which I thought was really cool.
Well, and this is I think, we've slowly been moving from history to narrative as we've gone on, and we get more and more and more narrative. And then, then you have the geography break. And then you have like one more section that is a little more history than narrative. And then once you get to this, practically speaking, it becomes almost all narrative. Like, we're now in a story, we're following individual characters and what they do. And it's not sort of you don't break every once in a while and say, and then Thingol issued a proclamation that affected all of that. And and this happened, and that, these wide spanning things. It's all individual action, individual words, individual thoughts. And I think you're right. And I think that strikes me as, it makes a lot of sense that this would be kind of fairy tale-ish, because the fall of Gondolin was one of the first things Tolkien wrote.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the direct antecedent to that. And so I think he probably wanted to sort of weave that in, since they, the gnomes, as he originally called the Noldor, are supposed to be
gnomes,
fairy tale creatures in a sense, who then sort of became eventually the elves we know and love today.
Yeah, and like any good fairy tale, it's got a taboo that should not be broken, that is broken, that causes everything to go bad. And in this case, the ban or the taboo is nobody leaves Gondolin. You know, that this is the hidden city. We stay here. If we leave, there's a chance the spies of Morgoth could find out about us or come back. And so in this case, it's Arathel, who's the sister of Turgon, and she's got wanderlust. She doesn't want to remain in the city anymore. She wants to ride out and visit her friends. Apparently the Sons of Feanor are her friends. I didn't know the Sons of Feanor had friends, but apparently they are friends with Arathel, so that's a thing. And Turgon, against his better judgment, yields permission, probably because she wouldn't stop nagging him about it.
Because do we get a sense of the years? Like, it could have been like decades.
Yeah, these are elves, mind you. Yeah,
I mean, if you have a sibling, and you just, I mean, imagine them bothering you for like 30 minutes versus bothering you for decades.
Yeah. Because siblings know how to push your buttons in ways other people don't.
That's right. Yeah. And so she goes out into the wild away, and it's that thing where it's like, I'm just trying to get from point A to point V, but this is Middle Earth. You know, travel is perilous at the best of times. But I like how they just gloss over that she and her company get enmeshed in Non-Dungortheb, the Valley of Dreadful Death, and there's an attack of fell spiders. And I'm like, wait, let's hear more about that. But it's like we're
we're hand waving.
Tolkien's not interested in that. Let's
yeah.
Tolkien is like, I don't like
shirts.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my god, yeah. So it's like, and they mention how the water's poison too, so you can't drink that. You know, the fell spiders attack. All the red shirts are scattered. Arathel is lost, and comes to another wood that is called Nan Elmoth, an enchanted wood. And I believe this is the same wood where Thingol and Melian met. Am I right on that? That's why there's an enchantment on this place. I think they mention it, or Tolkien does because I have it in my notes that was the original dwelling place of Melian and Thingol.
I'm going to the Google to find out.
Go to Tolkien Gateway. Ready, go. So.
Yes, that is correct. Melian met Thingol and Non-Elmoth.
Elmoth, yeah. So this is already like Magic Central, but now it's kind of become a place of not necessarily evil magic, but kind of dark magic, shadow magic, because it's where Eol the Dark Elf dwells. And he's not, okay, well, he is kind of a bad guy, but he's not like evil like Sauron or Morgoth level evil. He's just kind of a jerk. And wants to be left alone, and doesn't go out during the day, and just wants to live in his little house in this dark wood and visit dwarves occasionally, and that's it. And like,
yeah. Well, and it's supposed to be like the woods, the tallest trees, and the sun never even reaches the floor. And so this would be perfect for elves who are still kind of reeling from this whole sun business.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Yeah.
What's that about?
And why he prefers being underground with dwarves a lot of the time.
Yeah. I got to imagine, like, I obviously that was a big deal for the orcs, but that was considering the Sindarian elves had never experienced the light of the trees. Like, the sun had to have been a big deal. Like, game-changingly big.
Yeah, and they even, I don't think it's talked about in the Lord of the Rings movies, but, for our contractual reference, I believe in the Hobbit movie, they do have the feast.
Bingo.
It's like the festival of starlight or something, or the festival of stars or of lights is what's going on in Mirkwood when Thorin's company gets captured. And that's part of that. What helps them escape is And I don't know if that's referenced in the Hobbit book, but I remember in the movie they talk about that. So
They're definitely having a feast in the Hobbit book. And yeah, this place is very much like Mirkwood, right? It's completely black. Light doesn't reach the ground. And a lot of the elves of Mirkwood were Sylvan and Sindarin elves as well. And they don't seem to be troubled by the darkness much.
Yeah.
And they live underground, too, in that hill fortress that they live in. So I don't know, like, if they say, like, what kind of elf Eol is. Like, I know he's not Noldor. He doesn't like the Noldor. I guess
he claims Teleri. There's a point in the chapter where he says, my kin the Teleri. Or
he does. That's right. I think
when he's talking with Curifim, which is
we'll get to that later.
Best conversation ever.
Yeah. Another bit of trivia. They say Eol is the creator of this black metal called Galhorn, which I guess is the metal that Turin's sword will be made of later.
Yeah, isn't it part of a meteorite or something, like, or an asteroid? It's like part of like star metal type of thing. Because I mean, just to go back to Rings of Power, like when the Meteor Man was happening,
Meteor Man,
people were like, I remember when it was first coming out, people were like, wait, there's been like one meteor recorded in the entire Legendarium, and I think it was the metal that part of what he used to devise this metal. Maybe that's pulling from some of the Lost Tales or something, but I thought
I think it's mentioned in the Silmarillion just later.
Okay.
Yeah.
When they bring in Turin.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought it was interesting that Eol takes Arathel as a wife because he says he doesn't like the Noldor, yet he marries one. Yeah. So there's an interesting dynamic there.
Well, I mean, it's probably the first, like, it's probably the first lady elf who's showed up for a while, or like at least one of the first like highborn noble elf that's like of his same kind of social class, like, because it talks about he has servants, so I'm guessing there's other elves with him, and they don't really describe his halls. They just say like she comes across his halls because he kind of enchants the woods to like further drive her toward him, like.
Yeah, like a mouse maze.
Yeah, I mean, So I mean, he's already not looking great with the way he's kind of trying to draw her in. But she does marry him. I mean, it's not really. I don't think it's mentioned that he made her marry him, or he would never let her go. But then he never lets her go anyway. So.
I shouldn't laugh, but it's like, it's so awkward. Yeah, but it's like I think they say flat out, he doesn't force her to marry him. So she must see something in him initially, but he's just got this crazy control freak side of him,
Yeah. It kind of, I've wondered how old he is. If he's like, on the level with Thingol and Círdan and some of the other very old, Sylvan elves, and he's just sort of wowed himself away because he Círdan doesn't really seem to resent the Noldor at all, but Thingol does to some extent, and this guy really does. It's like, this was our domain for thousands of years, and then you guys show up, claiming it, right? And then he gets it back in his face. Yeah, but if it wasn't for us, you'd be dead on the end of an orc pike. But
yeah, yeah, definitely. Like, he's definitely got this prejudice against people he sees as, he calls them invaders and usurpers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, but again, from the Noldor's point of view, we're liberators. We're arriving here to drive the orcs out, defeat Morgoth. We're only, having land to live in is our right. It's what we deserve. So it's like you get to see that in encapsulated in the later dialogue between Eol and the sons of Feanor. So they have Eol and Arathel have a son together, and of course, since it's Tolkien, he has more than one name. So,
well, elves like they have like their birth name, then they have like their father name, and like when they turn when they kind of come of age, and then they
choose a name for themselves.
Yeah. So they're
they have both kind of a matrilineal name that their mother gives them, and then a kind of patronymen that their father gives them. So his mother calls the child Lomion, meaning child of the twilight, but his dad calls him Maeglin, or sharp glance. And it says his father does not deign to bestow this name on him until the kid is 12. So, which is not as much as that one Hobbit from the Rings of Power, where he was like, he's like, well, when did you get that name? Like just last week, right? Like he's like,
yeah.
Merrimack. Yeah. He's like, oh, they just named me that like a week ago or something like that. So he said Maeglin resembles the Noldor, but has his father's mood and mind, which is like definitely true.
Yeah, it's like the worst of both worlds. Well, I mean, I guess resembling the Noldor, at least in appearance, is not bad, but in other ways you shouldn't. But yeah, I mean, he's got like the Noldoran, like we said, the Noldoran pride, the Noldoran, whatever you want to call it, and then yeah, his father's whole, although he wants to leave, he doesn't want to stay, hidden in the dark wood, because he probably doesn't have any friends or, other elven children to play with. Like maybe he has servants of his servants, or Eowl's servants have kids that he can interact with sometimes, but it's definitely not the same as, I mean, it's like, on any other show where you have like the rich kid has a companion who's paid to be their friend or something like that. But doesn't have any real friends of his own, doesn't have any like real genuine friends. So
yeah,
because he doesn't want to stay, he wants to leave, and his mom is like telling him stories about the Noldor and like all this grand stuff they did, and he's stuck here living in this forest and can't leave.
Right, again, which is very like fairy tale like, they're both kind of stuck here. They want to get back to the outside world. They want to go home, which they, eventually take their chance, because Eöl goes, I think, to a feast at one of the dwarven halls. And so Maeglin and Arethel plot their escape. I forget how Eöl finds out. Does he just come back early? I can't remember.
He just comes back early.
Just comes back early. It's like, hey, they're
Where
gone.
is everybody?
Dun, dun, dun. Like, the squirrel meme where they zoom in on the squirrel or groundhog or whatever that, if you know what meme I'm talking about.
Dramatic chipmunk.
Dramatic chipmunk, that's it. But yeah, so Eöl pursues them, and now we get to the very mutually unpleasant conversation between Eöl and I think it's Curufin, right?
Curufin?
But Celegorm's also there.
Yeah, they're both jerks.
Yeah. They're sons of Feanor.
They're both sons of Feanor.
It's baked in. He's captured by them at like a ford that they hold, and they just like throw shade on him the whole time and mock him. I mean, he's no better. Look, you can just hear from everybody's voice in this exchange the sarcasm. I'm like, why can't you all be just open and honest with one another? You have to pretend like you're... Well, then, but I guess like Curufin like gets fed up with like the whole exchange and just tells him what he really thinks of him. But yeah, was it because like Eöl calls Curufin kinsman because he drops that phrase, and I like what Curufin says. He says something like, "Don't flaunt your wife's title to me."
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, ouch. Okay.
Yeah. Basically accuses him of like stealing her and saying just because you're married to her and she was not gifted to you doesn't mean we're kin.
Right.
It
means nothing. Yeah.
You're not a Noldor.
Yeah.
You're just a dirty Teleri.
It's funny because, like, he doesn't know the kinslaying stuff, But you could see, like, if he had said something similar to Thingol would be like, "You're right, I'm not a Noldor."
Right? Yeah. Mhm. But yeah, he accuses him of being like a wife stealer, essentially, like a But it. And I think Curufin also like basically tells him, if you try to keep pursuing them, something bad's going to happen to you. He has one of those moments of elven foresight where he's just like, I don't feel like helping you, but I'll just mention that if you keep going, you're not going to come to a good end. But
feels like, yeah, he got that foresight, and it's like, you know what would cause this guy to follow through? If I told him not to. So that's what I'm going to tell. That's
right, yeah. Uh-huh.
He has that oppositional defiance.
Reverse psychology, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, in the meantime, Arathel and Maeglin have made their way to Gondolin, and Turgon receives them with joy, but Maeglin only has eyes for his cousin, whom he's just met. Which is not at all creepy and disturbing.
I mean, like we said, he's probably hasn't had anyone his age, and especially there's probably hasn't been like someone as beautiful as like a Noldoran princess, basically, that's kind of captured his. It's very similar to like Anakin Skywalker and Padme in Star Wars. Like he sees her once and is obsessed because he has like. It's the best thing. She's the best looking person, or, like most beautiful person he's ever seen.
Maeglin's like, are you an angel? Are you a Maiar? Oh my gosh. It only that ill-fated, crush only gets worse out from here, folks. But it's like,
yeah, because that's what I was talking about earlier. It's like elves can like share their minds or like share their spirit with someone, and if they want to close them off, they can. And he's like, it's like any like any kind of guy who's like flirting awkwardly and like being too aggressive with trying to flirt with someone. And he's just like not picking up the signals, and she's like closing off her mind to him, and
she distrusts him. Yeah. Meanwhile, Eol tries to sneak in through that same passage that his wife and son went through, but he is captured. And I like how Turgon tries to treat him with respect and dignity. He tries to treat him with honor, but Eol doesn't. He doesn't know what's good for him and just reviles Turgon and demands the return of his son. And also says stupid stuff like, oh, Arathel is returned to her cage and will sicken again. I'm like, you don't know when to shut up, do you, buddy?
He does make kind of like a weird point there. Like she gets sick of Gondolin and then leaves and ends up trapped in a forest. And then she leaves the trap forest to go back to Gondolin, where she's trapped again.
But it's like, but you don't say that in front of the guy's sister, who's also king and can have you killed at any time. It's like I say, he doesn't know what's good for him, and apparently is not afraid to die because, I love what Turgon says, abide here or die here. He's given a pretty stark choice, and Eol takes the die here option and hurls it. Where was he hiding that thing, by the way, the javelin that he brought? Did he take that from somebody, or was he hiding it under his clothes?
Yeah, that's what I thought, but then they say it's poison, so I don't know why the Gondolinian elves would have a poison javelin.
No, it says he takes it out of his own cloak.
Okay.
When he hurls it. So I'm like, you guys are really not good at frisking then, I guess.
What? I could see a knife him smuggling in, but a javelin? What?
Yeah.
Where was
Well,
he?
and it's funny because like it calls it a javelin when he hurls it, but then when it goes into who's it? What is her name? Turgon's wife.
Adethel?
Yeah, she's the one who gets hit by it, and
she takes the blow for her son.
Right. Yeah. Calls it a dart. He doesn't call it a javelin, and I'm like those are very different things.
Well, I mean, I think dart is just like they're just referring to it being like an object that's like thrown, like.
Yeah, in medieval times, it was like that word, I think, had a wider usage, but still, that's a bit confusing phraseology there. But yeah, because like a dart could refer to anything from like something you launch from a bow and arrow to like something a ballista could shoot at you. So like, but yeah. So yeah, Arethel takes the blow from her son and dies from a poison wound. And I feel like she tries to plead for mercy for Eol up until the last, which shows that she genuinely cared for him. But Turgon is not interested in showing this guy mercy, and they have this really insane way of killing you in Gondolin. You are executed they throw you from the walls off this precipice for you to be smashed to death on these sharp pointy rocks. I'm like, okay, that's a thing.
I have to imagine they haven't had to do this very often. And yeah. I kind of just assume like this is the first time.
And like he just said it was maybe like an impulsive thing, like because he killed his sister. Now I'm going to throw you from the rocks.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
But it's not before. I mean, you have a note here that it's Eol before Eol dies. He curses his son. And as we talked about, your dying words in Middle Earth in Arda have power.
Yeah, he curses because Maeglin just stands back and watches it happen.
Says nothing.
Doesn't try to interfere at all. And he's like, you ill-begotten son, or whatever he calls him. And he's like, you will die the same death as I. So don't blame us for spoilers. Maeglin said it. Eol said it, rather. So
Mandos has been spoiling things for before the
for a
dawn
while now. Yeah,
before the trees.
Yep.
Mandos was probably like taking a nap at this point, and then woke up. He's like, "Huh? Did somebody curse somebody?
Yeah.
I think I'm needed. Yeah, who called? Yeah."
The Mando signal has gone up in the sky.
Or it's like that. This is a random tangent, but when there was this series of like made for video Dennis the Menace movies that I saw when I was a kid. And there's one where Dennis calls Mr. Wilson up at like 1 a.m. or something. And Mr. Wilson picks up the phone and goes, "Huh? Who died?" And it's like, because it's so late at night. And I feel like that's what Mandos is doing. Huh? Who died?
Who died?
And for our younger listeners, a phone is something you use to call people.
A landline is, yeah.
Yeah.
Your phone does actually ring if you turn. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
Turns out your phone is a phone.
And yeah, we already touched a bit on how Maeglin becomes now powerful in the city, but Idril distrusts him, which is kind of setting up a future love triangle. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it? And I think there's an interesting note. It says she starts to distrust her countrymen.
Oh,
or something like that after seeing what happens. And I thought that was like that was very interesting to me, because to me it's kind of a setup for what comes. And I mean, the whole thing is just a series of setups. You have this, conversation with Galadriel that leads to, Melian having questionings, which leads to this message coming from Círdan, and Thingol's ticked off and kicks the Noldor out of his realm for a while. So then when Turgon's sister leaves Gondolin, she can't go into Doriath and she has to go north, so she gets stuck in this woods. Like, it's just all this series of almost fated events that lead us up to the eventual fall of Gondolin.
Doomed events, as you might.
Yeah, exactly. Doomed. Yeah. And this is all Tolkien does this and we get Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit's basically an adventure story, right, with a good ending.
Mm-hmm.
There's some sad parts, obviously, but the Hobbit goes back home, a very rich Hobbit, and the Lord of the Rings, while having its hardships and everything, is ultimately a positive. Has a very positive ending. It's a good story, with a good ending and everything. Most of the stories from the first age are like flat out hardcore tragedies. Nothing goes well. Baron and Luthien barely scrape by, skin of their teeth into the happy ending realm. Everybody else is flat out just doomed. And this is and I think that it ties into kind of the heights everybody is at in the first stage. You have the elves at their very highest and their very greatest, and their fall from that height is so tremendous. It's like dropping a meteor, it's going to leave a crater, and they
dropping a meteor with a man riding it.
That's right. And and it's what's so sad to me is how the men just get wrapped up into this, and they lead, even especially in Turin's case, if you took every Greek and Shakespearean tragedy and just mixed it in a large bowl,
Joe thrown in for good measure.
That's right. Poured it out into cookies and served them. That's Torah. Turin bar. And so
these cookies are made of tragedy and woe.
and a little bit of nutmeg and some chocolate. But yeah, it can't. I remember the first time reading through the Silmarillion, how shocked I was. Man, nobody's getting a break here. It's not like the Lord of the Rings, where every once in a while a thing really does break for the whole first 10 chapters of The Hobbit are just Deus Ex Machina, Frodo and his friends getting saved from certain doom.
Oh, right, yeah.
Not so for the first stage characters.
Yeah, and it's every once in a while the Eagles will show up to save you, but you can't count on that.
No. It's no Tom Bombadil for you. He's off in Rune, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, you can't have him do his whole video game summon character thing where he shows up and every enemy on the screen dies.
He's off teaching friendship.
Yeah, it's magic.
So yeah, do we have any other wrap-up thoughts on this chapter? If not, we can get into feedback.
Yeah, nothing for me. But yeah, like we said, this is where the narrative really picks up. So if you've kind of been, if you're reading this for the first time and you're following along with us, and you're kind of, there's been some in the first couple times I've read the Silmarillion, there were struggles, but as you kind of get more into the narrative, it becomes easier because it's more of a story. You're following, like we said, the same characters. So this is where it really gets. It gets good and gets. It's already been good, but it really gets more of the story and makes it a little bit easier to follow. And it's going to be tragic, but it's going to be enjoyable to read about and read about some of this epic stuff that happens. So
you're not going to be constantly scratching your head, asking yourself, who the bleep are these people?
He has 10 names.
Why do they all start with F? Today's chapter of the Silmarillion is brought to you by the letter F.
F for Feanor.
Now I'm just thinking of that time that Ian McKellen was on Sesame Street and they managed to put a ring in the sketch he was doing. Oh. I saw it on YouTube once. Awesome. I was like, what? He's like, a beautiful golden ring. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Elmo thinks a ring will be nice for his friends.
One ring to rule them all. Yeah.
So I have an Elmo as Golem now running through my head. Yes, Elmo's precious.
Well, see, where is our Muppets Lord of the Rings? Come on, make it happen.
Oh my gosh. I would watch that like every day for months. Like, oh.
Well, before we get too off the rails, Jeff, I think you've collected some feedback for us.
Yeah, just a little bit. So talking about from our Fell Lands episode, we had Frau Hack, who has said on Discord, I'm just now listening to the Fell Lands episode, and I got to the brief discussion of Uruk-hai and development. The movie interpretation with the sac birth/hatching scene seems like it's intentionally referencing an amniotic sac. Combining that with baby orcs from Rings of Power and the insectoid features, my new headcanon is that the orcs are born the normal way as babies, but at some point go into these sac things, complete with some kind of umbilical cord feeding system, are fed some fell mixture by lesser orc slaves and develop rapidly into fully grown Uruk-hai, upon which they're hatched out of the sacs, as we saw in the movie. So that's an interesting theory, and I think I've heard that before. It's like even if it's not like they're born in the sac, they're like, it's like their maturation chamber. And I've always kind of had the theory that orcs they grow up rapidly. Like they're faster growing than a human. So,
I mean, they're bred to be soldiers, and the idea is we want to have them as soldiers right away. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
And then the other, this is from you, Thomas, but I thought it was worth noting that you were reading, what was it, the Lost Tales, or
in the Book of Lost Tales, Part 1, in the glossary, there's a Quenya glossary as well as some other elven terms. They mention that the word Kemen, who is of course in the name of Pharazôn's son in the Rings of Power, Kemen is a Quenya word that means earth or soil. And I'm like, so Pharazôn named his son Dirt, which, given those two's relationship in the show, seems appropriate that Pharazôn would name his son Dirt. Yeah. But one of the other Discord users, I think it was John Henry, mentioned that, well, isn't that like Adam?
Yeah.
The name Adam means earth or soil because God forms him out of the clay of the ground. So so I guess Kemen is like the Quenya equivalent of the name Adam, but I just like to think that Pharazôn is like, I'm naming this kid Dirt. So
well, he doesn't know Quenya. He probably, because he's he's anti-elf culture, so he's probably he probably heard this name at some point and thought it was cool. But yeah, and then responding to that, Frau Hack said Yavanna or Earth Queen Kementari. I did wonder why that name in particular. So, but I just thought it was funny that you found that his name is
Dirt. Yeah, I saw it on because there's an image in the Book of Lost Tales of Tolkien's early maps of Arda. And I saw the word Kemen, and I'm like, wait, what? And so I looked it up in the glossary, and it's like earth or soil. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Why'd you name me that, Dad? It's like, I'm so embarrassed.
Well, he'll just choose his own name and get 5 other names along the way.
That's right.
But eventually his name shall be the Witch King of Angmar.
And you can look forward to that like in
about 10 years or so.
10 years time, we cover season 5 of the Rings of Power. But until then, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make the Secrets of Middle-earth possible. And tonight we'd like to thank Christopher T, Richard S, Remedios S, Kathleen Y, and M. Cart. Their generous donations help us to continue to create the Secrets of Middle-earth and all of the shows here at StarQuest, and you can join them at sqpn.com/give. And of course, we'd like to hear from all of our listeners, what did you think about Beleriand and its realms? Oh, and I guess those other chapters too. So you can let us know on our Facebook page or on Twitter. You can send us an email at middleearth@sqpn.com. You can leave a comment on the YouTube video of this podcast, or you can visit our channel on the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. And next time, be sure to join us for our discussion of the Rohirrim, the Riders of Rohan, as we prepare for December's animated feature film, War of the Rohirrim. But until then, Jeff Haecker, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Middle-earth.
Thanks, Thomas.
And Patrick Mason, thank you as well.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And until next time, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Middle-earth on StarQuest.
Here's another podcast on the StarQuest network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/secrets.